In a previous lesson on the cell theory, we learned that cells are the basic units of life. In this lesson, we'll learn what it is to be alive. And to start off, just take a look at these objects on this screen here and ask yourself which one of these, if any, are alive. We have a computer, we have fire, we have a bacteria being attacked by viruses, the blue things. We have a DNA molecule, we have the sun, the earth, we have a seed. Yes, it's growing here, so that would be living, but what about the seed itself? Now, in biology textbooks, you'll often find a list of characteristics, and a living thing must have all of these characteristics to be classified as alive. I won't read them here, we're going to take them one at a time. First, living things are highly organized and self-maintaining. For example, the human body has lots of organs connected in complicated ways. On the right here we see a special preparation of a human body. The skin has been removed and the organs have been removed, and here we're seeing just the blood vessels. So we have a complicated network of blood vessels that feed the organs of the body. Clearly, living things are highly organized. What about self-maintaining? Well, here's a flatworm. And in fact, the flatworm's head has been cut off. So here's the head, here's the tail. Interestingly, the head can regenerate a tail, and the tail will regenerate a head. That's the kind of thing we mean by self-maintaining. Living things use energy and perform complex chemical reactions called metabolism. For example, the caterpillar here is eating the leaf. Right? So the leaf is a source of energy for the caterpillar. And the complex set of chemical reactions that go on in the caterpillar to keep it alive, we call that metabolism. The bees here in these pictures are getting a source of energy from the pollen and nectar from flowers. Even single-celled organisms like this amoeba here has to feed on others, right? So here is an amoeba that is capturing. The amoeba extends these portions of its cell membrane called pseudopods. It's capturing a paramecium, another single-celled organism. And here we see the paramecium being digested in a food vacuole, a digestive chamber inside the amoeba. Plants also use energy. Of course, they capture the energy from sunlight, and they use that energy to do some really important chemistry that builds glucose, a sugar molecule. So plants are making their own food, and that process is called photosynthesis. So the sunlight energy is captured by the green parts of the plants. The plants are using two simple ingredients in their environment, carbon dioxide from the air, water from the soil, right? And those two simple ingredients will be rearranged to form molecules of glucose, which is a sugar. Oxygen happens to be a waste product of that chemistry, but that process allows plants to make their own food. Living things reproduce and show heredity. And hereditary traits are those that are passed on from parent to offspring. So, of course, the flower, for example, is the reproductive structure of certain plants. And here we see a field of flowers. And the resulting union of the pollen with the egg forms a seed. Of course, the seed can be shown growing here. So plants are living things that reproduce. Of course, animals reproduce. We've got mama duck and baby duck, and we've got a chick hatching from an egg. This is the mother giraffe, and the offspring here is standing next to the mother. Single-celled organisms also reproduce. This is that paramecium, single-celled creature going through the process of cell division. That's its form of reproduction. Living things possess adaptations and undergo evolutionary change. Now, what are adaptations? Adaptations are those parts with purpose that we see in individuals of different species. They give the organisms the appearance of design. For example, here's a praying mantis. Now, the praying mantis has all kinds of parts with purpose. Notably, it's got these huge forelimbs, and in fact, the forelimbs have these sort of spikes on it, and that helps the mantis capture and keep hold of its prey that might be wiggling around. The mantis has big eyes. It's got a neck, which is uncharacteristic of insects, can fly. It's got all kinds of adaptations that help it survive and reproduce. The sea turtle has the shell. The T-Rex, of course, had a bunch of teeth here to rip flesh. The giraffe has the long neck. This insect, the leaf insect, is well camouflaged in its environment. These would all be examples of adaptations. These are features of creatures that help them survive and reproduce in the wild. Now, later in the course, we'll learn that in the late 1800s, or the mid-1800s to late 1800s, a very influential scientist by the name of Charles Darwin helped us understand how all of these individuals of different species came to be and how they have adaptations. He coined the phrase natural selection to be a process that's happening in nature that makes species better fit to their environments. And the better fitness refers to the traits that help the species survive, what we're calling adaptations. You may have heard of the famous finches on the Galapagos Islands. Well, Mr. Darwin's going to argue that the Galapagos Islands were colonized by a single species of finch. But over time, with reproduction, there is produced some variation in the beaks of the finches, for example. And as those finches started to colonize different islands that had different food sources, one island might have a lot of small insects, another island seeds, another island fruits, etc. Well, individuals with beaks best suited to the food source would have an advantage in the survival game, and they would pass on those traits to their offspring. He called this process natural selection, and it explained both how species become better adapted to their environments and how one founding species can evolve into multiple species when they get separated into different environments. So that's what we mean by possessing adaptations, the parts with purpose, and evolutionary change, how species can change over time as they interact with their environment. Living things also grow and sometimes develop and age and respond to their environment. For instance, this is a sequence of pictures that shows the first cell division in the embryo of a sea urchin. So here's a sea urchin. And this would be the fertilized egg. So a sperm cell has just entered the egg cell, and then what happens next is that single cell, fertilized egg, will divide into 2 cells. And then those 2 cells will divide into 4 cells, and soon you'll get a sea urchin. So this is what we mean by development. Animals are multicellular, but they start off as a fertilized egg. And of course, we humans also start as a fertilized egg and develop into babies. And finally, living things are either cells or are composed of many cells. We've seen that animals and plants are multicellular. But only with the invention of microscopes did we discover that there are lots of single-celled creatures on Earth as well. So in this picture down here, we see the silvery thing here. That's an amoeba, a single-celled predator. This green organism is called stentor. In fact, this amoeba has eaten 2 stentor. Also swimming around in this scene are these brown single-celled creatures called paramecia. Here we see a paramecium in a food vacuole. So the amoeba, the silvery blob, has captured the paramecium, and it will digest it. 2 other paramecia have not yet been captured. So all living things on Earth are either single-celled organisms or they are multi-celled organisms like plants and animals. So if we quickly go back to the first slide and ask ourselves whether each of these objects has all of the characteristics, the answer will be no for a lot of them. Well, a seed is alive. It is technically alive. It has the capacity to do all the things on the list, and the bacteria cell is a living cell. But it turns out then a computer, fire, the viruses, DNA, the sun, the earth, all of those objects are not technically alive. They do not have all of the characteristics on the list. And you can take a moment to think about which characteristics are lacking for all the objects here that are not alive. So we just went through a series of slides about all the characteristics of living things, and living things must have all of those characteristics on the list. NASA has a simpler definition for life. The NASA definition is a self-sustaining chemical system capable of Darwinian evolution. Now, by Darwinian evolution, we briefly touched on that. That's the process by which species change over time to become better adapted to their local environments. And it involves the ability of living things to reproduce with heredity, so they pass on traits, but sometimes there are new variations. And this allows a species to change over time. Darwin called that process natural selection. Now, I've highlighted part of the NASA definition in blue, part in red. We'll compare it to that list we saw at the beginning of the lesson. So here's the list again, and this is the kind of thing you'll see in a biology textbook. And here's NASA's definition up here. So in blue here, the self-sustaining chemical system, that sort of is captured in the blue statements down here. Highly organized, self-maintaining, performing chemistry called metabolism, grow, respond to the environment and our cells, right? That's the chemical system, the cell. Darwinian evolution would be captured in the red items here. They reproduce, show heredity, and possess adaptations, undergo evolutionary change. Remember, to qualify as living, an object must have all of these characteristics. If an object does not have some of these things on this list here, we would say it is not alive. And as it turns out, for us here on Earth, it is cells that are the smallest things on Earth that have all of the characteristics. So cells are highly organized and self-maintaining. Cells use energy, perform metabolism. Cells reproduce and show heredity. Cells have adaptations and undergo evolutionary change. Cells grow and they respond to their environment. And cells, of course, are cells. So it's an amazing story then. 4.5 billion years ago, when the planet formed, the Earth was lifeless. It was a lifeless rock. Today, of course, there are millions of different species, living organisms on the Earth today. So in 4.5 billion years, we go from a lifeless rock to a rock with life. Well, a key step in that story, it was the appearance on Earth of the first cells, capable of all of those characteristics on the list, or simply capable of being a self-sustaining chemical system capable of Darwinian evolution.